To refer to someone as a man of letters may sound to contemporary ears like something from another era. Perhaps that's somewhat fitting, given that for decades in the literary life of this country, Barry Callahan has been an unwavering presence as a poet, professor, short story master, publisher, and essayist, to name just some of his too-many-to-list contributions. Fortunately, he's just published an impressive and hefty 2-volume collection that brings together some of the best of his fiction and nonfiction. It's entitled All the Lonely People, Collected, and Raise You on the River, Essays and Encounters, 1964 to 2018. And Barry Callahan joins us now for more.
And I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you here. I have to say, it was wonderfully nostalgic to read some of this stuff. I want to start with the father of the current Prime Minister, because this is
Pierre.
This is a time, Pierre, you say. This is a time that many people, obviously, who are watching this, were not in Toronto, not in Ontario or Canada, and will not know. So let's start to tell these stories. After all these years, which of his qualities, Pierre Trudeau's, that you saw then stand out for you as fundamental today to understanding the impact he had on Canada?
Can I explain that by telling you how I came to meet him, or how our coming together happened?
Sure.
Because it's fundamental to, I suppose, the way I approach things all my life, and it's what connected us. I wrote a piece about politics current at that time and the politicians, Diefenbaker, Pearson, Tommy Douglas. And the piece was about language. And it was a simple premise. This was a period when Trudeau was Minister of Justice and was going to run for Prime Minister.
1967, 68.
7, 8, right there. So my premise was simple. What I said was, listen to Diefenbaker. Here is a man who cannot speak in a coherent paragraph. You can try and try and try if you were a film editor, and when I was a junior newsman in the CBC newsroom in the 50s, it was one of my jobs to try and edit Diefenbaker into shape. You can't do it. He was incoherent. So my argument was, if a man was incoherent as he spoke to you, why should you assume that he would be capable of constructing a coherent policy? And that was the truth about Diefenbaker. When he got into power, he couldn't. There were no coherent policies. I went on to Pearson. I said, Pearson, the great negotiator, when you listen to him, he sounds like he's negotiating with the language, hoping it will show up. Tommy Douglas, the socialist, it didn't matter what he was talking about. The language was ideologically shaped, right? And then I said, I was in Montreal in '67 with an English poet, George Barker, and we were being addressed by a man that none of us knew. And Barker said to me, oh, who's that guy? Does he write good poetry? And I said, no, that's a guy named Pierre Trudeau. He's the Minister of Justice. He may become Prime Minister. And he said, I can't believe it. He speaks so coherently. Each clause is right. It was rational. This was the first thing I noticed about Trudeau, that he spoke in completed sentences. The sentences add up. It wasn't that he was, the world's full of intellectuals, but everything he said made sense. It had an intelligent rationale behind it. What's happened with Facebook and Twitter, all that stuff is you see the people are losing the language, losing it. And while that is happening in the general discourse, certain words get destroyed.
Fair to say, though, that Pierre Trudeau was unusually extraordinary when it came to...
He was.
Yeah.
That's why we all were so... It was a special moment. I mean, people recognized. It wasn't the whole business about charisma and all of that stuff. Those are words that get bandied about. People... I remember being out west. There was a lot of cheering in the front, but the back were all these serious middle-class people and farmers studying this guy like this, because they'd never heard anything like that. And they weren't leaping up and down, but they knew that something was going on that was quite different.
You said at the time you believed he potentially could be a great man. Did he live up to those expectations of yours?
Great man. Listen, I wrote at the time, I remember Peter Newman singled out this particular paragraph. in what I wrote. I said the problem with Trudeau is there are two forces at work intellectually and emotionally in Trudeau. On one half of him, he's a Jesuit, and the other half, he is the perfect product of Jansenist Quebec. Now, Jansenists are people who fear emotion, fear the flesh. They have a very dark view of emotion. I associated that with Trudeau's attachment of nationalism to emotionalism. And I first was convinced that I saw the problem when he was confronting large audiences, and you would expect him to now seize the moment and lift the people out of themselves, and they could both achieve some kind of greatness together. And he shied away every time. He wouldn't do it. He would not excite the emotions of people. He would retreat into that stupid language of his about the land was strong, the land was great.
That was the slogan in the '79 campaign.
It was awful. He became a sloganeer.
Well, let's talk about the best example of that, shall we?
Yeah.
It's 1979. They were running on the Liberals were on "The Land is Strong." That was the slogan. And you wrote a speech for him that he was supposed to deliver at Maple Leaf Gardens in front of 16,000 people. They packed the gardens to see Pierre Trudeau give this speech.
Yeah.
And you were under every expectation that he was going to go up there and give that speech. And what did he do?
Well, I was told, look, here was the situation. And it was a very touching situation. He was having a hell of a time with his wife. And a couple of people who were close to Trudeau working with him, particularly Jerry Goodis, they were really upset because his heart wasn't in it. She was phoning him at 3 a.m. and saying all kinds of crazy things, and she was hanging around with the Rolling Stones, and who knows?
Their marriage was melting down in public.
It was melting down. There was even the story that he'd punched her in the backseat of a limousine. Who knew? Whatever it was, Trudeau had lost his touch, and his heart was not in it, and he was delivering this stupid speech all across the country about the land is strong. You know, it was beneath him to deliver that speech, but he delivered it. So Jerry asked me to write a speech, and I, with no promise that it would be used, he would hope that Trudeau would do it. So I decided the only way to break this rhythm was for Trudeau to make everything personal in this speech, to take what he was going through personally and see what the country was going through in his personal story, that kind of agony that he was. So I wrote this speech. I don't know whether it was any good or not, but Jerry, when I was through, Jerry was in tears. And then they had to wait for Trudeau to say whether he would deliver it, right? The day before the 16,000 in Maple Leaf Gardens, the word came he was going to do it. And so we all trundled off to Maple Leaf Gardens. We sat there waiting, and Trudeau came out, roars and cheers, and the whole world was going to be his oyster if he just did it. And he started out, I want to speak to you very personally, from the heart. And he stopped. And I remember Jerry Goodis reached across and took my hand like this. He stopped, and he said, I want to explain how the land is strong. And oh, God, no. And he went on to talk about constitutional law and this and that. And that he could suck the energy out of a room. I mean, with his presence in a positive way, and then when he disappointed people, he sucked the energy out of a room. You've never seen energy leave a stadium of 16,000 people faster than on that night. And he just droned on and on and on.
Now,
and on.
Do you think, he of course went on to lose that election.
Yes.
Do you think
to a guy named Joe Who.
To a guy named Joe Clark, who became prime minister for 9 months.
He was known as Joe Who.
Yes.
Can you imagine what that was like for Trudeau? To lose to Joe Who?
You quote Pierre Trudeau at the time saying, "The bad politician, like a bad artist, seeks to please."
Yeah.
What do you think he meant by that?
There is a politician who sets out to always try to comfort you and and by and large ends up speaking in slogans, and the language gets devalued. I go back to the language. What do I mean by devalued? In your younger years, my younger years, we all watched Ed Sullivan. Ed Sullivan personally destroyed the word wonderful. How did he destroy that? Because he would introduce a chimpanzee that could spin a ball on its nose and say, this is wonderful. And he would introduce the world's greatest opera singer. She is wonderful. And he introduced 16 mice that could run in figure eights. This is wonderful. Wonderful And remember, wonderful contains the word wonder, right? There's no wonder left. The word was dead. The same thing has happened in our time to the word awesome. Your torn jeans are awesome. Your pork and beans are awesome. Awesome is, awe is before the sacred. Awe is before God. Awe is before the, what? So the language can be robbed of its meaning. And when you have, the easiest way for a politician to try and please you is to use the language that he thinks is most familiar to you, right? And in using that language, he will thin it out so that you're never challenged. So you always think, oh, yeah, you're half asleep. You say, yeah, I know. He's just trying to please you, but not bring you alert to say, gee, I never thought of that, or I don't know that I want to consider that.
So is it your view
and Trudeau did that a lot.
That's what I was going to ask. Do you think he's one of the few politicians who was prepared to provoke people?
He was not only prepared to provoke them verbally, he was prepared to give them the finger. You know?
Which he did do.
Which he did do.
Yeah. If I were to ask you to compare the political culture of Pierre Trudeau's day to what you see as the political culture of Justin Trudeau's day, what would you come up with?
I have to see that in a kind of context. And the context is Harper. I think something happened in the country with respect to Harper. I have trouble, I disliked Harper so much and his presence that I have trouble remembering his name. And that kind of thing happens to me. Trudeau comes along, Justin Trudeau comes along, and he's this amiable, articulate, friendly, open, generous-hearted spirit. How can you resist him? Right? And he announces he's got a vision. Now, the problem is, he doesn't have a vision. You can go through everything he's ever said, you'll never find what the vision is. There's something different about Justin and his whole approach, and it's what he's trying to do, as far as I can understand it, is he offers a kind of affirmation of who Canadians think they are at their best.
This is how you described Canada for English readers of Punch magazine. You wrote, and this is now we're going back 13 years, you said, we still refuse to agree on what the words to our national anthem are. We don't know who we are, and we don't want to. That way, we don't have to be anybody's anything. It's a terrific freedom.
Right.
You are kind of foreshadowing with that piece Justin Trudeau's description of Canada.
A little bit.
Well, because he said we have no core identity and there's no mainstream in Canada.
There's no mainstream. So here's what I meant and mean to this day. And I think it's a great gift. I have been able to go, well, let me say this first. I never in my life have suffered from what is supposed to be the perpetual Canadian question, what is my identity? I never asked myself that question once in my life.
Let me pursue this notion of your identity a little bit, though, because you are very clearly, through your writing, through your life, through everything, very clearly identified with Toronto.
Right.
And of course, your relationship with Trudeau and the things you've written about the country and seen relates you to Canada as well. You are from the province of Ontario as well. Do you feel like an Ontarian? I've
just written a very long piece in my magazine Exile, and it's in Razor on the River, as a matter of fact. It's called In God's Headbone, because too long a story to tell, but I ended up owning a 200-year-old log house on 100 acres out in the darkest part of Ontario, southwestern Ontario, and I've spent a lot of time coming to terms with that landscape, and I did. I've even written a novel set out there. So I feel in touch with my land. I feel in touch with the country out there. And I certainly feel in touch with my city here. It's very strange. I've tried to leave this city. You know, this can be a very frustrating place to live if you're of a certain temperament. And I have tried to live in several cities in the world, and I just keep coming back. But the same thing happened to my father. You know, New York was his oyster. What did he do? He decided to come back to Toronto. I mean, I used to look at him sometimes. I say, what the hell did you have in mind? You had New York in the palm of your hand, and you came back to this British bastion town, this terrible place to grow up in. I mean, This was an awful town to be a young man in the 50s.
Well, it's not a British bastion anymore, that's
No,
for
it
sure.
isn't. No, it isn't. Thank God.
So you like the fact that half the people in this city aren't born here?
I like the fact that 60% of the people in this city are various shades of brown. That's what I like. The white bread world is just about gone.
This is from 2005, called Raise Your Five. The mosaic means that immigrants, when they arrive in Canada, are not assimilated or quote-unquote melted. Any melting, as former Governor General Vincent Massey and others of his ilk insisted, would have led to Americanization, a vulgarization of society, intermarriage, a thinning not only of the blood but of power and influence. This is Massey culture as opposed to mass culture,
Right.
and it is essentially one of contempt, a fear that the bloodlines will be contaminated and centers of influence reduced.
Right. Here's the way I saw it. The people who had power, who were essentially Anglo-Saxon, essentially Protestant, they looked at the situation and said, okay, listen, you've all come here. Wonderful. We're happy to have you here. You know, we're so happy. Why don't you just stay together? Why don't you just have your own? We'll pay you to have your own newspaper. We'll fund your own radio. Speak Italian. Eat a lot of spaghetti. Have a good time. Don't interfere with what's going on in the running of the country. The alderman back then, we'll deal with Alderman Joe Piccinini. You know, we'll find enough bananas. You just keep doing what you do. Have a nice time. Speak Italian, live Italian, be Italian. This, I saw, is the most cynical but brilliant way of preserving power. If you were running the banks and owning the banks, you were running the universities, et cetera, and so forth, the same people did it decade after decade after decade.
Do you have, though, any...
Now it's changed.
Well, I was going to say, do you have any space in your heart for a kind of a patrician noblesse oblige represented by the likes of John Robarts and Bill Davis and Roy McMurtry and those folks who, you know, all came from very privileged upbringings and yet seemed to care a great deal about what was going on with the common person in this province and country?
They did. I didn't know John Robarts. Well, I'd met him 2 or 3 times, but I knew Roy McMurtry pretty well. And I know exactly what you're talking about. But those guys were what we call red Tories, right? Or you want to use the word patrician. Those guys were nothing like the gang that surrounds Ford right now. Am I right? They're all ex-Harperites, maybe?
For the most part,
Yeah.
yep.
So, anyway, were they people good of heart? Yeah, well, you can try this argument of paternalism on with any number of groups, starting with black people. You know, paternalism is a generosity of heart and a generosity of spirit. And Roy McMurtry, since you mentioned his name, was a very generous-hearted man. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't argue with that for a second. But Roy McMurtry was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. You know, the guys he was being generous to were not.
You've mentioned your dad a few times here, and I don't want to assume that everybody who's watching us knows that Morley Callahan, the great writer, was your father. And when you were growing up in Rosedale, I'm told that you had quite a fascination with the underworld. So I want to play a little clip of you talking on a former TVO series called Flying Solo. This is from 10 years ago. Watch the monitor right there.
No, Sheldon, I don't want to see myself.
Well, you're gonna. Here we go.
How did I end up from early on in my life getting along with gangsters? I used to go down to the old Barclay Hotel when it was still up. It was the only nightclub in town. I was very close to the Maître D'. I used to sit down there. And other than an observation one of those guys made once, I have no answer. His observation was that I knew how to keep my mouth shut. I knew how to listen.
That's a great skill, learning how to listen.
Yeah.
What do you think?
It may seem, since I've been just motor mouthing my way through the last 10 minutes here, it may seem to be a contradiction. But in fact, I do know how to keep my mouth shut, and I do know how to listen. Well, see, I have the same approach to hoodlums as I do to prime ministers, I'm sorry. Because they all become stories to me. Everything is story. So I'll just give you a little glimpse of what I mean. I was once the best man at a mafia wedding.
You want to say whose?
No.
Okay.
And the patriarch, one of the patriarchs of that family, let me put it that way. Since I'm not Italian and I was Irish and I'm not American and I was Canadian, he was endeavoring to take me into his confidence as a gesture, right, in his kitchen. And as soon as he started to take me into his confidence, I began to really get worried. And I said to my friend who was getting married, I said, put an end to this right away, because what he was explaining to me was how he had murdered a particular person that I knew about. Okay, he stopped.
You want to say who that was?
No. He stopped. I think it's in my Barrel House Kings, but I don't want to go into it. Okay. He stopped, and the next day, my friend got married. Now, this is where it becomes a story for me. He got married, and everybody in the church is going to communion during the Mass, and I am not, because I am a lapsed Catholic. And so I am sitting in my pew, surrounded by a whole church going to communion, and suddenly standing beside me is this patriarch, looking at me like this. And he looks up to the whole church and says in that voice, you know, what's going on? What can he have done that's so bad he can't go to communion? Right? To me, this is hilarious, you see? That's the story.
I wonder if part of this also is a bit of rebellion against what you used to call Toronto the Good, which is what this city was called when you grew up here.
Well, my father had a kind of slant view of things himself. So it was not surprising that, but it wasn't just my father, it was my mother. My mother was a remarkable woman. What she used to do with me when I was 5, 6, she'd put a record on in her loneliness, and she would hold me in her arms, and she would dance. And I would listen to the music, and she would dance with me. And I was very close to my mother as she danced with me, and I heard that music. So I went to school at the age of 6. And the nun in the first week eventually got around to the, expected thing. Would every child sing a song they've learned at home? She got to me, this young nun, I remember her very well. She got to me and I stood up, and I was a very sweet-faced kid. So I went, squeeze me, mama, till my face turns cherry red, cherry red. The nun went berserk.
You think?
What kind of song is this? She phoned my mother and said, I don't know what's going on. Your son has just sung. Where would he learn such a song? What? And my mother said, but that's we danced to that song. So I wouldn't say separate. I just I came at the world differently.
That may be the greatest gift they gave you.
And it was an enormous gift. So that I looked at, I immediately in my life, I was looking at things strangely.
We've got a few minutes left here, Mr. Callahan, to talk about somebody who was supremely important in your life, Claire Wilkes, with whom you were together how many years?
47.
47 years. And she passed away a couple of years ago?
17.
2017.
Yeah.
Such a hard question, but you lived so long with her and now you are without her.
Yeah.
How's life?
People tell me that I sound good and I look good, and I say, well, it's a mask I have mastered for hysteria. A friend asked me, what is grief, the other day? And I have come to the conclusion that grief is an overabundance of love. It's like a blister. And you know what a big blister is? It hurts all the time, and it's enormous pressure all the time. And of course, one way to get rid of the blister is to break it. Except if the blister is the blister of love, filled with love, you can't break it, because then it'll just become a meaningless little scar. So you're doomed to live with that blister, that abundance of love. It has taken a toll. I'll never get over it. But we had, the last doctor we had was a palliative care doctor, and he became fascinated. He was quite open about it. He spoke at a wake for her. He became fascinated with us because, and her particularly, because No conversation while she was lying in bed and while she was getting closer and closer to death ended without it turning somehow into laughter. We both shared a kind of sardonic, even dark laughter. And I'll give you an example of her kind of wit and what kind of romance this was in its wholeness. About 3 weeks before she died, we had to have that conversation as to what was going to happen to her body. What do? You want to be buried in a box? You want to be cremated? What do we do? And where do you want? And she said, I want to be buried in Mount Pleasant Cemetery, and I want to be cremated. I said, okay. So 2 days later, I came back. I said, okay, I have the plot in Mount Pleasant. That's done. And you're going to be cremated. That's done. And I have ordered the stone, and I've made a decision. I have a plot waiting for me in my own family, the Callahan family plot in Mount Hope, which is the Catholic cemetery. Claire, obviously, she was a Jew. She was not being buried in a Jewish cemetery. She wanted to be buried, so to speak, in the middle. And I said, this is what I've done. I've ordered the stone. Your name is on the stone, your birth date and your death date. You're going to be dead in 2 or 3 weeks. And I put my name on it too, because I'm going to be cremated and I shall be buried with you. I'm vacating my spot in my family tomb, and you and I will be together. I said, the line on the tomb is from a great Israeli poet who was a dear friend of mine named Yehuda Amichai. And the line is, the two of us together, each of us alone. And there was a pause. And she looked up and she said, well, that's better than marriage. That pure Claire, you see.
This has been a great pleasure having you in that seat in this studio.
I'm happy that you're prepared to just put up with my rambling around.
Raise You on the River, Essays and Encounters, 1964 to 2018, and All the Lonely People, collected.
Yeah. My collected short fiction, yeah.
It's all there. Thank you, Barry Callahan.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Been a pleasure.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.